The only people who don't want to disclose the truth are people with something to hide.
You've engaged in what I consider very problematic rhetoric in the campaign trail. When you accuse Obama, the president, of being a food stamp president, and everybody gets into the birther fun, and there's we don't know what game that Donald Trump's going to pull this week. He says he wants to go on the offensive with the birther talk. Do you have a problem thinking back on it of having used ethnic politics with terms like food stamp president?
Look, I find your assumption so absurd that it's hard to answer your question.
Okay.
Let me take the birther thing for a second.
Sure.
What Mitt Romney did the other day, people say, oh, you ought to relax, you ought to be a little bit lighter. So he tells a joke. Now, it happens to be a joke which serves him in a totally different way than you're calculating. It reminds everybody in Michigan that he was born in Michigan. He's a Michigander.
Yeah.
And the poll that came out this morning, he closed a 5-point gap in Michigan.
Well, how does that justify the use of that reference to birther talk when birther talk has been poisonous?
It was a throwaway line. It's part of the common culture.
Yeah. You think it's funny that the president had to show his papers to shut down the birther talk? He had to go to Hawaii and get his documents released. Do you think that was funny?
I think that it is bizarre that people think that it is a challenge to be able to say, I was born there, here's my birth certificate. What's the big deal?
Because it hasn't stopped. Because we got members of your caucus, the Republican caucus, like Louis Gohmert, and these people that keep talking it up.
But Romney was making, by any reasonable standard, he was making what's called a joke.
First one you ever told.
And it was a joke which actually, no, he just said...
okay, let's listen to Romney. Here's Mitt Romney telling a joke. If it's a joke, listen to it. There certainly was a punch to it.
Now, I love being home in this place where Ann and I were raised, where both of us were born. Ann was born at Henry Ford Hospital. I was born at Harper Hospital. No one's ever asked to see my birth certificate. They know that this is the place that we were born and raised.
You know, it's amazing how... you know how African Americans generally, at least people have emailed me in the last couple of hours today, how they react to this? Do you understand they have a reaction? They think this is racial talk? That this whole thing about welfare cheats is just relentless stuff.
I think there are a lot of people in America who listen to people like you, who tell them all day, all day, every day how they should.
So it's my influence on them.
You just had a panel where the guy who was black was telling the two guys who were white they were nuts.
Yeah, fine.
Okay.
So
and the two guys who are white are going, gee, why are you not more sensitive to being black? I think Michael Steele knows he's black. I don't think this is a great shock to him.
But you can laugh about it, but you don't think that you've used it in the past. What's a food stamp president?
Food stamp president's a guy whose policies are so destructive that he creates the longest unemployment since the Great Depression. And he puts more people on food stamps, most of them white, than anybody else. Why do you assume food stamp refers to black? What kind of racist thinking do you have? Wait a second. You're being a racist.
Let me tell you why.
You assume it refers to black.
Let me tell you why. Because from the beginning of paying attention to politics, Ronald Reagan would talk about the welfare queen who was African American. He'd talk about the young buck waiting in line. Yes, he did. He talked about the welfare queen out in Chicago.
Who was African American.
Yeah.
I don't believe he ever used the term.
No, he didn't say he didn't
African-American.
have to. He also talked about, let me try this. How about the young buck waiting in line for food stamps to buy booze with? This is a history we have here. And this lingo is so clear to every African-American watch right now.
So we're not allowed to tell the truth about food stamps?
You sit here and chuckle about it as if it's not a game you're playing.
Wait a second. We're not allowed to talk about food stamps because your sensibility tells us that 35 years ago...
Give me a break. You've got that diabolic smile of yours, and I know you think you're winning here, but everybody out there who's black or white knows exacyly the game that's being played here.
Game. You have the worst president.
That's your shot.
No, wait a second. Economically, yeah, we did put up a chart today at Newt University, which people can get at newtuniversity.com. It shows every recession since World War II. Right. All of them are up here except one. The Obama depression is down here.
The only people who don't want to disclose the truth are people with something to hide.